Hi, subscribe to Revenge Tale not to miss new stories. I find myself in a situation that was once only familiar to me through YouTube videos about infidelity. Those videos were purely for entertainment, and I never could have imagined that I would find myself in a similar predicament. It all started when I received an unusual envelope in the mail. What caught my attention was the absence of a return address, as well as the 2 stamps in the upper right corner. The handwritten address led me to believe that it might be from an old military buddy trying to reconnect. When I opened it, however, I discovered that the letter was addressed to Mr. Unknown, a name I am using to protect my identity. This is what the letter said. Dear Mr. Unknown, I am sending you this anonymous letter to inform you that your wife has been involved in an affair with Mr. Bossman, a man who is known to be involved with multiple women. I read the letter multiple times, trying to process the information it contained. The fact that the sender wanted to remain anonymous and felt the need to inform me about my wife's affair with her supervisor was overwhelming. The mention of multiple women suggested that the supervisor was not just involved with my wife, but with others as well. I had caught a glimpse of him once when I dropped my wife off at work. Standing at around 6'4" or 6'5", he was bald, below average in looks, and out of shape. I couldn't help but compare him to a heavier version of Gollum. Knowing my wife's preferences, he didn't fit the mold. During my time in the military, I had focused on endurance training, but about 6 months before leaving, I decided to start lifting weights. I was tired of feeling fatigued during my workouts, so I gained 20 pounds of muscle. Without trying to sound conceited, I must admit that my physical appearance significantly improved. At 5'9", I never considered myself a ladies' man, but with my new physique, I began to notice a sharp increase in attention from women. They would discreetly check me out, and one of my wife's friends even showed subtle interest at one point. However, my wife, who tended to be jealous, seemed oblivious to all of this. As a religious person, I never took advantage of these opportunities or used them to boost my ego. I never flirted with anyone or had affairs. It was simply a confidence boost. My wife's only comment was, "If your neck disappears, you need to stop." It was a bit underwhelming, but it made me believe that she loved me for who I was, not just my body. Returning to the anonymous letter, I couldn't fully trust its contents since there was no concrete evidence. Confronting my wife wouldn't be helpful either, as she could easily deny everything. What else could I do? I lacked evidence, and if there truly was an affair, confronting her without proof would only drive it further underground. Suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed solid evidence. Allow me to give you some background on us. I am 35 years old, and my wife is 33. We met in college and got married soon after. I entered the military, and during our time together, we welcomed 3 children, a 9-year-old boy and 2 girls aged 7 and 5. My wife has been a stay-at-home mom, taking care of our children while I served. I am confident that she remained faithful throughout my military service. We had a supportive group of friends who helped her when I was deployed. Contrary to the stereotype of cheating spouses during deployments, it's challenging to keep such things hidden, although it does happen. Long story short, I was rarely at home during my last posting, and as I continued to advance in rank, it would only get worse. So I made the difficult decision to leave the military. After serving for 10 years, this was a pivotal moment in my military career because leaving at this point didn't make financial sense. Military orders typically span at least 3 years, and retirement occurs after 20 years. However, I chose to start over in the corporate world, starting from the bottom. My primary motivation was to be a more present father for my children, as I had missed out on spending much time with them before. I had never even changed a diaper. When I announced my decision to leave the military, my wife didn't receive the news well. She doesn't handle uncertainty well and had grown comfortable with the life we had built together in the military, despite her complaints about my frequent absences. Now that I'm no longer in the military, she presented me with a long list of demands regarding our living arrangements, how much money I needed to earn, and other factors that would make her feel comfortable and ensure security for herself and our children. She cried a lot during this period. As we all know, job opportunities dictate where one must go, but I did my best to fulfill her criteria. We were incredibly fortunate to find success in the civilian world. I secured a job in the right state, within driving distance of my parents, whom she adores. I earn a significant income in the six figures, which, by military standards, is quite impressive. We are in an area with excellent public schools and low property owner fees, where everyone is polite. By the way, did I mention that she always complained that she couldn't start her career because of the frequent moves during her military service, which is true. She expressed her desire to use her diploma in logistics and supply chain management. She started looking for a job, and 3 months later got her dream, if you can call it that. She works at a distribution center where all her colleagues are women, and their boss is the bald man I mentioned earlier. Although her salary is small, this is the job she has always wanted, and the first since graduating from college. I fully supported her in pursuing this opportunity, as in everything she decides to do, which she then acknowledged. Since I received this letter, I have been trying to gather evidence to confirm its authenticity. If a person wanted to expose her boss, why wouldn't he report it to HR? Why did he tell me instead? Nevertheless, I diligently watched my wife. I knew her mobile phone password, so I checked her messages and actually found text messages with her boss. But their conversations were pretty ordinary, and they didn't communicate much. This letter bothered me for almost a week, and I couldn't find any evidence of my wife's infidelity. She's been working here for 5 months now, and the only noticeable change is the decrease in our intimacy. She's been rejecting Zach for 2 months now, but I can't accuse her of cheating just because she's not in the mood. She always has excuses, like that the job is getting more stressful or she's getting tired. Despite a 2-week search for evidence, I found nothing, but I continued to be vigilant for any hints. I've often wondered about the sender of this email and thought it might be a prank. At one point, I almost joked about it to my wife, but changed my mind. I was going to close this strange chapter and accept that our intimacy would no longer be as frequent as before. However, one evening, my wife was talking about her job and mentioned how her female colleagues envy her because of the attention she gets from her boss. She said they were jealous of her because she had received the best quarterly reviews and had already been recognized as Employee of the Month 3 times, despite her short tenure. She was genuinely pleased with this recognition, and initially I was happy for her, since she had never had a real job before. But I couldn't get this letter out of my head. Why were some of her colleagues so jealous of her confession? Although envy between women is a common occurrence, it seemed a bit extreme. I became suspicious again and considered hiring a private investigator to keep an eye on my wife. However, I changed my mind at the last minute because I didn't want to spend money in case I made a mistake. In the end, I didn't have convincing evidence or a good reason to be suspicious. There were no incriminating text messages, just this mysterious letter, her reduced interest in intimacy, and her newfound admiration for her work. Everything seemed pretty normal, right? So I decided to purchase an online GPS tracker to install it in her car and keep an eye on any unusual places she might go. The GPS tracker I bought easily fit into the OBDI port under the steering wheel. I was nervous because he was quite visible, but my wife is not very good at technology. I thought I could easily come up with an excuse if she noticed it, especially considering that I often do car maintenance. I can just tell her that it has to do with a fuse or something like that, and she'll believe me. I would not recommend using such a GPS tracker for such covered operations as the one I was going to conduct. It was Friday, and I was looking forward to what the GPS would show. At lunchtime, I noticed that her car was parked in an unfamiliar place. It wasn't her workplace, the supermarket, or our children's school. It was a remote area of the city where we rarely visit. I decided to Google this place and found out that it was a hotel. I immediately requested permission from the boss to leave work and headed to the location indicated in the GPS, which was about 35 miles from my workplace. When I drove about 25 miles and there were only 10 miles to go, I noticed that the GPS signal was moving away from that point. I was watching the signal on the app on my phone. I sped up, but I saw that the GPS signal was heading back to her workplace. Her car was in that place for about 2 to 3 hours, and I just missed it. I was so disappointed. I parked my car and surveyed the surroundings, trying to determine whether her car was at the Best Western Hotel or the nearby restaurant. It crossed my mind that she might be dining with her colleagues, considering the proximity of the restaurant and hotel. However, it seemed peculiar for her to travel such a distance just for a meal when there were numerous options between her workplace and that location. She wasn't particularly fond of golden coral, willing to drive 27 miles for a meal. That day, I returned home with countless questions but no answers. My wife noticed my evident distress upon arriving home. However, I chose to conceal my concerns and told her that I had a difficult day at work. I made a conscious effort not to confront her because I lacked substantial evidence. Consequently, I decided to hire a private investigator as I couldn't continue checking my phone and leaving work to track her down in an attempt to catch her cheating. On Saturday, I met with a private investigator whom I found on Craigslist. Although he wasn't a licensed investigator, he possessed a good camera phone and charged a reasonable rate of $1.25 per hour. I hired him to monitor my wife during her lunch hour. Since his services were only required during those hours, the cost remained relatively affordable. The investigator also installed a GPS tracking app on his phone to provide me with the same information. I informed him about the incident involving the Best Western and Golden Coral, showing him the location. Monday through Thursday passed uneventfully, with everything following its routine. However, on Friday, the private investigator alerted me to some activity. He texted me that my wife was driving towards the Best Western, and he was discreetly following her. I verified his report by opening the app. Since he knew her destination, he went ahead and reached the hotel before her. When my wife arrived, she entered the hotel alone. The private investigator discreetly captured her entrance and followed her inside. Familiar with her boss, whom I had previously described, the investigator recognized his car. Carefully situated in the hotel lobby, he surreptitiously recorded my wife entering the elevator. Despite the risk involved, he managed to join her in the elevator without raising suspicion. Unfortunately for him, repeating this maneuver multiple times could have compromised his cover. You get what you pay for, after all. Inside the elevator, my wife disembarked on the 3rd floor, an event the investigator diligently documented. However, he decided against leaving the elevator on the same floor to avoid suspicion, returning to the lobby instead. Approximately 3 hours later, he observed my wife's boss exiting the elevator on the same floor, proceeding to check out at the front desk before heading to his car. Each step was meticulously recorded. 10 minutes later, my wife emerged from the elevator, promptly making her way to the car. The private investigator diligently captured this on tape as well. My suspicions were confirmed. She was indeed cheating on me with her boss, the bald guy. Now armed with the necessary evidence, I was ready to confront her. The private investigator sent me all the recordings and photos via my Dropbox account. I compiled them into a comprehensive video, along with my laptop and the envelope discussed earlier in my post. At that moment, I surprisingly felt a sense of calm, as I had mentally prepared for this precise situation. When she arrived home, I summoned her to the kitchen, where the laptop was waiting on the countertop. The video showcased her arrival at the hotel, her subsequent exit from the elevator, and her boss emerging shortly after. I presented the video to her, and within minutes, she fully grasped its damning content. Turning to me with an apologetic expression, she murmured, "I can explain." Tears welled up in her eyes as she repeated, "I'm sorry." I silenced her and pointed at the screen, urging her to continue watching. Despite her attempts to turn away and explain herself, even pleading for me to stop the video, my anger intensified. I grabbed her by the back of her hair, forcing her to face the laptop. Pointing at the screen, I harshly commanded her to keep watching, emphasizing that she knew exactly what she had done. As she sobbed softly, her trembling form speaking of fear, I maintained my tight grip on her hair. The terror in her eyes confirmed her deep-seated fear, a fear she had never witnessed in me before. I must clarify that violence is not in my nature. I had never laid a hand on her or any other woman in such a manner. Nevertheless, that day would prove to be an exception. When the video ended, I forcefully pushed her to the floor, causing her to sprawl across the room. Overwhelmed by an overwhelming urge to harm her physically, I berated her, accusing her of engaging in an affair with her boss only 5 months into her new job, and perhaps others as well. She replied through tears, claiming that this was the only time she cheated. I asked her how long it had been going on, and she admitted that it had been for 2 months. She said she didn't care about this man. The sexual encounter meant nothing to her, and she couldn't explain why she did it. I shouted at her, demanding that she start talking, otherwise I would have turned to violence. She confessed everything, admitting that she wasn't genuinely attracted to him. But because other women showed interest in him, she wanted him too, almost like in a competition. I think this is due to the fact that he was a male boss in a women's team. According to her, he was involved with other women. I couldn't figure out how my formerly beautiful wife was related to this guy who resembled Gollum. She was only doing this because other women were interested in or were already involved with him. It seemed that she had forgotten that she was married, entering into an intimate relationship with this guy, and denying her husband the same. What kind of world did we live in? It seemed that she was with him more out of competition than out of love. I was extremely upset, and it was impossible to express it in words. It seemed to me that the purity of my wife's image was colored. That night, I called her offensive names and said I didn't want to see her anymore. I kicked her out of the house because I couldn't stand the sight of her, and she went to live with a friend. That night was extremely stressful because I had to feed the children and put them to bed, and I didn't know where everything was in the house. I was running around like a headless chicken trying to resist calling my wife because my 5-year-old was crying. My wife has always been a housewife and was more involved with children than I was. I was the breadwinner, and she was the mistress of the house. I thought we were making a great team until this happened. She ruined everything because of her desire to compete with other women, ignoring the fact that she is married. She showed very immature behavior. According to her, female employees who worked under this guy, Gollum, rushed at him, even those who were married. It was a competition among adult women, married women, which puzzled me. Adult women behaved like students, and I suspected that one of these women might have sent me this letter. Why do adult women compete to get involved with an unattractive, troll-like man? This guy turned me off by taking advantage of his female subordinates and turning their workplace into a shameful nest. I want to get a divorce, and I want her to feel the consequences of this betrayal. However, I relied on her to maintain our home, so we will inevitably have to adapt. My unfaithful wife is writing to me and calling me today, asking for permission to return home. I didn't sleep well last night, and I have to go to work this morning. She knows where everything our children need is stored, including their medicines. My 7-year-old daughter needs special attention because of allergies and fastidiousness, which my wife does well. My 5-year-old daughter can also be difficult to handle. I brought the kids to school and left work early to pick them up. It wasn't as bad as I expected, but I was pretty tired. At that time, I did not respond to my wife's messages and calls. In the evening, I called her and told her to come home. When she arrived that evening, it surprised me, because she came with her older sister, perhaps out of fear of being alone with me. My sister lives 90 miles away from us. My wife must have confessed her infidelity to her and sought her support. My stepsister lived young and was divorced and very similar to my wife. It's easy to confuse them if I didn't know they were two sisters, but she's 2 years older and we've always gotten along well. She is more responsible and respectful than my wife. My stepsister and I have always communicated well with each other. My wife is a spoiler in the family, and her older sister often has to clean up her messes. Although I didn't want to reconcile or be nice to my wife, I was pleased to see a friendly face. Although I believed that my stepsister would always support her sister, family ties are strong. I appreciated that she came to mediate for my wayward wife, as she could understand what I was going through because of her own experience with her husband's infidelity, which led to their divorce. My stepsister took me aside and explained that she was not here for my wayward wife, but for the sake of the children. She acknowledged that my wife might be immature and suggested that for the sake of the children's well-being, I should let my wife come home. We can try to separate the house first and see how things develop from there. After our conversation, I had to admit that my sister-in-law has the art of persuasion with words, because she managed to calm me down to such an extent that I could tolerate the presence of my errant wife. I glanced at my wife, sitting in the corner with a red face and swollen eyelids, as if she had been crying for days, trying to avoid looking at me. It gave me satisfaction. She realized the wound she had inflicted on me with her betrayal. When the children came out of their room and greeted her joyfully, the atmosphere became calmer and my heart warmed up. I sincerely wished that she would not betray me and remain faithful. Seeing her with the kids was something I appreciated because she was a great mother, but not such a good wife. We lived in a 3-room apartment, so my missing wife and her sister moved into the guest room, and the children stayed in the 3rd. My missing wife came out of the bedroom after putting the kids to bed and started cooking dinner, and I was sitting on the couch in the living room with my sister-in-law watching TV. When my sister-in-law started talking to me, I sensed her intentions. She was trying to distract me from my wife's infidelity or make everything seem normal. Deep down, I wanted everything to go back to the way it was, so that we could go back to the way it was before. I'm tired of being angry and exhausted, taking care of the kids alone and doing my job without my missing wife. I needed a distraction, and my wife's sister was quite talkative. While my missing wife was in the kitchen, my sister-in-law mentioned that she was leaving the next morning, but would stay longer if necessary. I told her that I might file for divorce because I can't look at my wife the way I used to, and I can't trust her anymore. My sister-in-law understood and did not try to persuade me to do the opposite. When my wife finished cooking dinner, she served it to both of us without looking or saying a word. The next morning, my sister-in-law left, and we continued our normal life. I was still silent with my missing wife, and she didn't seem to be getting ready to go to work that day, but I didn't ask about it. In the afternoon, I consulted with a divorce lawyer to explore my options. The lawyer mentioned that based on my wife's income, I might have to pay alimony and child support. It seemed absurd because she earned only $45,000 a year, and she cheated with her boss. Cheating with a boss, especially when in a serious relationship, is unacceptable. Perhaps her new financial independence, as it was her first job after college, played a role in her actions. However, she had clearly gone too far. I had no problem paying alimony and child support, as I actually did it while serving in the Army when I earned less. It wasn't about money, it was a matter of principle. If she could cheat on me with her first boss, what's to stop her from doing the same with another person in positions of power in the future? When I returned home that evening, I spoke to my wife for the first time since what I call D-Day. She wrote a letter that she wanted to read to me. She explained that she wanted to express her thoughts without getting emotional. As she read the letter, all she said was how sorry she was. She carefully avoided mentioning the unpleasant guy and just apologized for betraying my trust and immature behavior. She expressed her desire to continue our marriage and her willingness to do everything to restore it. Surprisingly, she also mentioned something unexpected. She said I could sleep with other women if I wanted to. This revelation took me by surprise because my wife has always been a jealous type. I doubted her sincerity and told her that I did not need her permission to sleep with other women because she had deprived herself of the right to have an opinion on this matter. I believe that she used this sentence to manipulate me and remove the blame if I acted on her. I interrupted her and explained that she had not explained why she had deceived me for 2 months. It wasn't a one-time blunder, it was deliberate and deliberate. She planned to go to the hotel and enter into a secret romantic relationship with this disgusting guy, risking a lot on what? I informed her that we are getting divorced, and my decision has already been made. I added that despite her physical attractiveness, I couldn't sleep with her or have her by my side. She kept asking, "Why are you being so cruel to me?" I spoiled my wife, treated her like a princess, never raised my voice, always spoiled her, let her set the rules of the house, and gave her control over our household. She's used to it. I treated her well and never offended her. Maybe that's why she ended up with the first guy who ordered her around, believing that I would remain the same good guy even after she cheated with her boss. It's incredible, but it doesn't end there. She also informed me that she quit her job because she couldn't see her former boss's face anymore. She said she had everything with me, but she threw it all away because she thought she could fit in with the staff. She admitted that she didn't know how it turned into sexual intercourse. Even though I was disgusted by the thought of her boss, I couldn't help but wonder how a man who looked like a golem managed to seduce such an attractive wife and make her forget her vows. I persistently asked her questions. I wanted to know why she fell in love with him. She was in agony and stammered trying to answer my question. She admitted that she struggled with this issue herself, trying to figure out how she got in touch with this guy and why she kept coming back to him over and over again. She stressed that it wasn't even because of the pleasure of sex. She noted ironically that it was definitely not because of his appearance. The only explanation she could find was a combination of several factors. He used words skillfully and was extremely resourceful. It always seemed that he had the right answer at the right moment, as if he had the answer to all the questions. His position of authority also played a role, as the fact that all the girls admired him and tried to impress him made him more attractive. Although the reasons she gave seemed subtle and carefully considered, I was only thinking about how I would enjoy my possible influence on this golem. I informed my errant wife that I intended to expose him. At that moment, my wife expressed her willingness to do everything to make me happy, even if it meant a divorce. She didn't like to see how upset I was about her. I told her that I wanted to reveal the golem to his wife. I explained that although she was stupid to let this guy take advantage of her, he had to be exposed, and it was time to take revenge on him for destroying my family. My wife told me where he lives and his wife's name. I asked how they communicated without using SMS messages, and she told me that they used a working messenger by email. I insisted that my errant wife log into the messenger and show me the messages. She hesitated and thought it was not a good idea because it would only make me angrier. She also expressed fear that I might harm her as she showed me the messages. I continued to insist, but she insisted that since I had decided to go for a divorce, she would show me messages when the divorce was finalized and we would separate. A few days later, I was able to find the wife of this golem. By the way, he was 51 years old and his wife was 48. I checked his background to find out where he lives. He had 4 children. The youngest was 12 years old. I made another copy of the video and saved it on a flash drive. Then I went to the golem's house when I knew he was still at work, possibly involved in something with one of his subordinates. I knocked on the door and his wife answered. I told her my story and gave her a flash drive with evidence, as well as an anonymous letter that was sent to me. She said that she received a similar letter and turned to her husband with questions. However, he denied any wrongdoing and accused the women at work of being lazy and hating him because he insisted that they do their jobs properly. He convinced his wife that these women were trying to ruin his life, and she believed him. She had never suspected anything suspicious or thought about hiring a private investigator. Golem's wife is very grateful for the information I provided, and I left her my contact details. She expressed gratitude for my service to the country, and we said goodbye. I'm not sure if they eventually divorced or separated, but at least now he knows that I'm aware of his actions. Last week, I provided all the information I have to the HR department, I spoke to the lady on the phone, and she invited me to come in person. During the visit, I provided another flash drive with evidence and a statement from my errant wife, who admitted that her infidelity was the reason for her dismissal from work. I believe this should be enough to dismiss him from his position. Before leaving my place of work, I decided to visit the golem. After I left the front reception area where the HR department was located, I turned the corner to the truck loading area. It wasn't a very safe place, and one of the side doors turned out to be unlocked, allowing me to get inside the building. Although I was not familiar with the building plan, I knew the golem's name, and so I asked the employee who directed me to his office. As I walked through the warehouse, I noticed that most of the workers there were women, including the loader drivers. It seemed that this company had a policy of predominance of female employees. Although there were men, they were few and far between. As I approached the golem's office, I saw him come out of one of the offices. I was about 50 feet away when I called his name. He turned to me, trying to identify who I was. He might have thought that I was a truck driver who came to deliver something. When I got closer and almost came face to face with him, I didn't say a word. Instead, I hit him with a right hook, knocking him to the ground with one punch. After that, I quietly left the warehouse. When I got to the exit door, I looked back and saw a small crowd gathered around him as he was starting to come to his senses. Then I opened the door and left the building. Yesterday, shortly after returning from work, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I found 2 policemen standing there. They came to question me about the attack that took place at my wife's previous place of work. They suspected that I might have been involved in the attack on the golem, but they had no concrete evidence. It was clear from the wording of their questions that I was a suspect. Although I was videotaped, the description was not very clear, perhaps because I was wearing a hat. In short, the golem identified me as a suspect and wanted to file a complaint against me. I told the police that I was not responsible, and they asked me for an alibi. I confirmed that I was at home with my wife at the time, and they requested a conversation with her. I agreed, called her, and she lied to protect me. She didn't know about the attack in advance, but she quickly understood and supported my false alibi. I'm not sure if the police are satisfied with our answers, but they took photos of our cars, wrote down my contact information, and said they would contact us if they had any additional questions. I made a serious mistake, and it's hard to believe that a golem who had an affair with my wife dared to call the police on me for attacking him. Fortunately, the news spread quickly, and one of the women he was involved with plucked up the courage to file a sexual harassment claim against him. This newfound courage could be due to the fact that he was being investigated by the legal service and that I ran into him at his workplace. As part of the investigation, the legal department questioned most of the women, and they revealed the truth. It turned out that he pressured many of his female employees, demanding sexual services. Most of them initially refused, and those who agreed said they did it out of fear or under pressure. This is a difficult situation, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case, when some women were ready to support him to move up the career ladder, but as soon as he faced legal problems, they all presented themselves as victims. Still, I'm happy with the result. I heard that he was fired from his job the next day. My stray wife stayed in touch with some colleagues, so I'm not really sure if the story is true or not. A few days later, I contacted his wife to find out how she was feeling, and she informed me that they were currently separated. She explained that he no longer lives with them. She was the one who became known to me because several sexual harassment cases were filed against him. According to his wife, after a confrontation with him, he confessed that he really only had sexual relations with my wife. However, it is difficult to believe his words, especially considering the fact that several women are suing him. It doesn't bring me any comfort. In fact, it would have been a little easier for me if it turned out that several women were involved in this situation, and not just my wife. It amazes me what she got out of this situation. I ask myself questions and doubt my judgment about choosing her as my wife. If she was ready for such behavior so easily, it raises doubts about her loyalty during my military trips. As I write this now, I feel completely drained and depressed. I've read a lot of posts about surviving infidelity to find solace and reassurance that I'm not alone in this. I also talked on the phone with my brother, and he suggested seeking help from a therapist because of my current condition. Veterans are provided with medical care, including visits to therapists, which will not become a financial burden. However, I hesitate and feel anxious about revealing my problems to a stranger, even if he is a professional. Nevertheless, here I am, bearing my soul to a virtual community of unfamiliar faces. There's something oddly therapeutic about seeking solace and advice from anonymous individuals, gaining new perspectives through their comments and responses. As time goes by, I find myself still residing in the same house as my estranged wife, although we now occupy separate bedrooms. To my surprise, her sister has been paying more frequent visits, and it seems as though things are gradually returning to a semblance of normality. My cheating wife, in an attempt to appease me, has been making great efforts to keep me content. However, despite her endeavors, we have not shared any intimate moments since the day I discovered her betrayal. The desire to engage in physical intimacy with her has completely escaped me. I found myself procrastinating when it comes to pursuing a divorce, realizing that the longer I delay, the more comfortable I become with her resuming her role as a wife and mother. Initially, I believed that my wife might have been inviting her sister over to mend our fractured relationship since she knew we got along well. To my surprise, it turns out that my sister-in-law is contemplating moving closer to us independently. With her children reaching adulthood and her youngest about to start college, she desires to reside in closer proximity. We have a plethora of family members residing nearby, including my parents, who are aware that our marriage is facing challenges and that my wife committed infidelity, although they are unaware of the specifics. Despite her unfaithfulness, my parents still hold on to hope that we can work through our issues for the sake of our children. Several weeks pass, and my sister-in-law secures a job within our vicinity, subsequently moving here. Consequently, my wife and I continue to dwell under the same roof but lay in separate beds. Essentially, we have transformed into mere roommates, and I consistently decline my wife's advances for intimacy. As challenging as it may be to forego physical pleasure for an extended period, my military background has taught me self-restraint. Instinctively, I've noticed that my sister-in-law visits more frequently, seemingly more invested in spending time with me rather than her own sister or the children. My wayward wife eventually becomes aware of this and confronts her. However, I only learn about the confrontation retrospectively, as my sister-in-law gradually reduces her visits without explanation. Considering my wife's tendency to be jealous, her reaction does not surprise me. Perhaps this turn of events was for the best, as I pondered over my developing feelings for my sister-in-law, despite harboring an enduring attraction towards her for quite some time. Due to my commitment to her younger sibling, I never acted upon these emotions. Consequently, I found myself contemplating whether to reconcile or pursue a divorce with my unfaithful wife. However, I increasingly find myself swaying towards the idea of divorce. The prospect of reconciliation appears daunting as I struggle to regain trust in her. Trust is an essential element in any successful relationship, and I cannot share a bed with someone whom I cannot trust. After all, she engaged in a 2-month affair and deliberately withheld intimacy during that time, an act I consider unforgivable. Remarkably, my wife believes there is still a chance for reconciliation, enacting considerable effort to entice me. She resorts to seductive lace nightgowns, often worn around the house without undergarments. Aware that she is attempting to bombard me with affection and seduction, I am unfortunately aware of my own vulnerability. Alas, her plan succeeds, and that night in the kitchen, closets were not the only things we found ourselves entangled in. Grabbing something from the refrigerator, perhaps a beer, I walked by and noticed her standing at the kitchen counter, her back facing me. Clad in a sheer lace robe, devoid of panties and a bra, I tried to resist the allure. However, her previous provocative display around the house had already sparked my arousal. Thus, as she leaned on the counter, her back to me, I approached her from behind, placing my hands firmly on her hips and gently adjusting her into a standing position. Lifting her lace robe, the moment intensified, becoming the most passionate encounter we had ever experienced. It lacked the slow tenderness that characterized our previous lovemaking. Instead, it was raw and fueled purely by my long-suppressed desires. I noticed that she reached climax swiftly, her body responding more intensely than ever before. Though I may have imagined it, her reaction seemed unlike anything I had witnessed in our 10-year-long relationship. Throughout that period, our physical connection had always been gentle and affectionate, devoid of aggression or roughness. Regrettably, we were forced to discontinue our encounter as our children, drawn by my wife's impassioned cries, began emerging from their rooms. Still in a daze, I should have suggested we continue discreetly in our bedroom, but instead, I retreated to the bathroom to complete the act alone. It was an unfortunate decision, as that fleeting moment of satisfaction with my unfaithful wife unearthed an aspect of her sexuality that I had been completely unaware of, a penchant for rough and aggressive intimacy. This revelation came as a surprise to me, as I believed I knew every facet of her being. Before meeting her, my experience with women was limited, yet I remained faithful throughout our marriage. However, it felt as though I had married a stranger. In our usual marital intimacy, I always let her take the lead, attentively listening to her desires. I had read numerous books on how to please a woman, all of which emphasized the importance of understanding her body's cues. Even Bernie Mac once humorously touched upon this topic. I felt as if our sexual experiences were purely conventional, which may not have been what she truly desired. But last night, I took control, disregarding her preferences, and surprisingly, she responded positively and reached climax faster. This left me wondering what else I didn't know about my wife. I began questioning myself, pondering whether it was my fault that she sought the affection of another. Perhaps if I had been more assertive and dominant in bed, she wouldn't have strayed at the first opportunity. Maybe that's what she craved, her hidden desire, and I failed to recognize it until now. All the marriage advice I had absorbed seemed inaccurate or inapplicable to her. That one night, it seemed like her body responded to my dominant approach, and my self-centered focus, disconnected from her desires, heightened her response. It made me think that perhaps she enjoys being controlled, desiring someone to assert authority over her. I had always been taught to be polite and gentle with my wife, perhaps influenced by the same books on intimacy that my priest had read. Now I'm starting to believe that her infidelity might be a result of my ignorance about certain aspects of her desires. I yearned for guidance on this matter, but there was no one I could turn to for answers. Externally, I may appear as the strong military man, trained for combat, but when it came to my unfaithful wife, I transformed into a soft and gentle man, allowing her to dominate both our household and our finances. It has become evident to me that I relinquished my power in this marriage, both inside and outside the bedroom. Identifying my shortcomings is crucial, as failing to do so will risk repeating these errors in future relationships. Although our impromptu, intimate encounter was a mistake, it did shed light on our relationship. I now believe that due to my failure to assert myself, my wayward wife saw an opportunity to explore being controlled. It brings to mind the notion that this might not have been her first experience of this nature. Some individuals on this platform suggested that I should undergo STD testing and consider paternity tests for my children, which is a sensible suggestion. My children undeniably resemble me, making it hard to believe they aren't mine. I used to have confidence that my wife remained faithful during my military service, but that assurance has been shattered. These past few weeks have revealed that there is much I don't know. If I hadn't received that letter about her infidelity, she might still be involved with Gollum to this day. I often wonder if his assertiveness played a role in her continued attraction towards him. Yesterday, I took an STD test and received negative results on the same day. Additionally, I have decided to proceed with the paternity test, as many of you recommended. I secretively collected saliva swabs from 3 of my children for this purpose, without my wayward wife's knowledge. I will receive the paternity test results in approximately 4 weeks, although I'm not overly concerned about the outcome, as I believe my children are mine. The timing of their conception supports this belief. During my military service, we resided in on-base housing provided for married service members. As for an update, there isn't much to report at the moment. I am still contemplating moving forward with the divorce. My lawyer has drafted the separation agreement, and it turns out that I will be required to pay her alimony. This won't be much different from our current arrangement, as I have been providing her with financial support since she became a stay-at-home mom. Presently, we maintain a civil relationship and sleep in separate bedrooms, essentially living as roommates. We haven't engaged in any intimate activities since our unexpected encounter on the kitchen counter. Despite her efforts to win me back, I have been avoiding her by staying out late, spending time with friends after work, and sometimes not even returning home. She calls my cell phone to check on my whereabouts, but I deliberately choose not to answer. She has noticed my emotional distance and believes that I have mentally checked out of our marriage. I should have initiated the divorce process weeks ago, but my aversion to change has made me hesitant. Additionally, I'm concerned about effectively managing my demanding job while sharing custody of the children. When we do separate, I will likely seek a 70-30 custody arrangement, allowing me to spend more time with the kids. I adore and cherish every moment I have with them. Often, my children prefer spending time with me rather than my wife, who tends to be wayward. I indulge my children, buying them gifts and being lenient, while she takes on a disciplinary role. To avoid my wife's scrutiny, I sometimes hide the presents I purchase for my kids, although she eventually discovers them. As the primary breadwinner, I have been content with this arrangement, as she has been the homemaker. Fortunately, I have not been contacted by the police regarding the assault, and hope it stays that way. Gollum has reportedly faced a civil case, but I am unsure if he has been imprisoned or what consequences he has faced. Prior to my intervention, these women did not feel that reporting him to the HR department for sexual aggression or a similar offense would be effective, possibly because they believed their voices would not be heard. By confronting and humiliating Gollum, I believe I provided them with the courage to stand up against him. Yesterday, I received the paternity test results, confirming that all 3 children are indeed mine. I am relieved by this outcome as I proceed with the divorce. As mentioned earlier, I have no qualms about financially supporting my wayward wife. I informed her in advance that I would serve her with divorce papers, and though she cried, she understands that there is no turning back. Despite the embarrassment and pain she caused, I genuinely wish her well. I have no doubt she will soon find someone else, as she remains an attractive woman. However, our relationship has come to an end. During our conversation prior to serving her, we discussed her future, and she mentioned the possibility of getting a part-time teaching job to keep herself occupied. We agreed that I would continue to provide her with $3,000 per month as an allowance, which includes child support, ensuring financial support for her and my children. I have heard suggestions that avoiding the legal system may not be wise, but I have concerns about further government involvement in my income. Lastly, we finalized our divorce agreement with the presence of both our lawyers. It was an amicable divorce, and I hold no grudges against her. She clearly regrets her actions and has taken responsibility for them. For the sake of my children, I have forgiven her, yet I will never trust her or consider reconciling. Recently, I found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good area of town. There are plenty of beautiful women around, and since my wife was the only woman I had been with, I never had the chance to date before. It is not as easy as it seems to gather the courage to ask a woman out, as I never really learned how to date. Nonetheless, I am an attractive individual, and I catch the attention of women from time to time, so I believe my chances are good. Additionally, my sister-in-law has been visiting my apartment more frequently now that I am no longer living with my wayward wife. It is evident that she is attracted to me, and we have been spending more time together. However, I am not interested in dating her, and I believe she understands that. Nevertheless, we both enjoy each other's company.